This is based on a memoir that was published, I think, about 12 years ago by Brad Land. That book is obviously very much part of his story and the things he experienced. And he was beaten. There's a goat with laxatives. I mean, a lot of the things that happen in this movie are represented in the book. Has anything changed in those 12 years? Have things gotten better or worse? Or the things that he is describing in his memoir just as prevalent today as they were a
I,
dozen years ago?
yeah, I don't think anything's changed at all, basically, which is just bizarre, right? I mean, the fact that it hasn't really changed in maybe 100 years, or I don't know how long, frankly, is bizarre. I mean, like people are breaking the Geneva Convention regularly on our campuses, and it doesn't seem too complicated to me in terms of like not wanting to let that happen. So yeah, I mean, hopefully this movie, but also a lot of stuff in the news. I don't know if people saw the ESPN piece about the sodomizing incidents, along with other kind of horrible hazing things that were happening on football teams in high school and in college all across the country. So I mean, we sort of have to pay attention to young dudes. There's a lot going on there.
There's a very brief scene in this movie of what I think we can call torture porn. It's graphic sex where the guy is kind of choking the woman. It's just like a couple of second shot that you use, and the way in which this is viewed, clearly very important, even though it only lasts a second or two. Can you talk about that scene and why it's included and how it fits into the bigger picture of what you're trying to address here?
Yeah, I was saying to you outside, I'm really glad you noticed that shot. Like, I think in that shot was everything that Brad felt like he should aspire to. Like he was both connecting to the darkest part of the male psyche, or the male inclination, or whatever that is. Both that's something that just tore him apart. Those two guys out there, those forces inside of that, and paradoxically, maybe that's also what he should have had. That's what he should have, if he had had some of those, values or abilities in himself. Maybe he would have been safe. So I think he's almost examining that, and you can see that he's just kind of dead to it. He doesn't understand how he's supposed to relate to or live up to that.
One of the things that you decided very early on is that you've worked in nonfiction films as well as narrative films. You decided to make this a narrative feature. Did you ever consider trying to do something in this world as a documentary, or does narrative give you something that you can't do in nonfiction film?
Yeah, I mean, my company had actually thought very seriously about trying to make a fraternity doc a couple of years earlier, and we're sort of interested in that kind of stuff. And really, it's an access problem. It is impossible to get access, and the closest that anyone's ever come really is Frat House by Todd Phillips, which was his first movie. And the only way that he got in was to submit to the hazing himself, which of course presents all kinds of controversy from a documentary point of view. But yeah, I mean, it's just really hard to get in. But I think the other thing that's maybe most important about making a movie like this, and why Brad Land's story in particular was so necessary to presenting this material, is that without the framing tale, without his trauma going into this process, it just becomes sort of a documentary where you just watch people do horrible things. So it's the fact that he was so damaged going into this whole thing that allows us to kind of lens the whole process through his experience, which was traumatic.
When you're thinking about the ways in which you're going to shoot the two, I guess, centerpiece scenes of violence, the beating and the hazing, they are obviously going to exist in opposition to each other narratively a little bit. When you're thinking about how you're going to shoot them and tone and level of violence, what are the conversations that you have with your crew, with your actors, about what that balance is going to be, and what did you want it to be?
Yeah, I mean, I really think that the forces that were alive in these people who beat him, and the forces that were alive in what happened in the basement, are very similar forces at work. And so in terms of the actual beating, we wanted it to feel as loose and as uncontrolled as the hazing stuff. So we really like when the criminal was beating him. I had the stunt guy show him a lot of stuff that he could just kind of keep doing himself. So I just let him keep going. It wasn't like one hit and then one thing. Like it was all about this humiliation and kind of dragging him around and like humiliating him on some level. So I wanted those two things to be congruent, because in the end, you know, if you're poor, a lot of these forces that young men are dealing with, these inclinations, are manifested in gangs and violence, or you know, drug abuse or whatever it may be. And if you're middle class, maybe you join a frat.
But you don't really exercise those demons if you join a frat. That becomes part of you. And I suspect that's why you created the character of Mitch, who doesn't exist in the book, that he is somebody who is evidence that this is not a phase. This becomes a way of life. Is that the backstory of James Franco's character?
Yeah. So I knew of a couple legacy guys from. So I had friends who went to UVM, and a bunch of them were in frats. And I went to a party one night, and there was a legacy guy there, and you know, he was like 40 and just getting hammered and trying to, you know, screw girls basically, and it just always stuck with me. I mean, it was just like I couldn't believe it, really. I mean, I guess maybe I shouldn't be laughing, but it was ridiculous. And so yeah. So when Mike and I were going through the script, I just said we should put one of these guys in there. And then of course James was a producer, and we were like, well, I mean, come on, that's too perfect. So yeah, cameos are really tricky, but I ended up, I mean, I think that the scene is one of the great scenes in the movie for me.
Is that because the actors themselves are kind of reacting to Franco's presence?
Well, it's that. So that's one of the cool things about that scene, is that the actors felt exactly about Franco as an actor as the frat boys would have felt about the legacy dude Mitch, like this legendary guy who was so crazy. But then the other thing about that scene is I talked with Franco a bunch before he went in, and we just talked about the violence, and he talked about the slapping, and he kind of was like on about the slapping. And I was like, yeah, there's a lot of slapping, like physical. Yeah. So he goes in, and I'm on the monitor, and he just walks in and just hauls off on Brad. And I was like, whoa, 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 because there wasn't supposed to be any physical contact.
That whole scene, like punch me, slap.
Yeah, well, no, the punch me, you know, the punch me in the face and then punch me in the stomach, but he wasn't supposed to start hitting him.
Oh my goodness.
So he walks into the room, and he just smashes Brad across the face. And I could just see the shock on Ben's face, like, whoa, you know, but Ben's into it, and he's such a good actor, so he just rolled with it. And everyone outside on the monitor was like, do we stop? And I was like, no. So that also just adds this kind of spontaneity to the scene, and then he got them revved up in this way that felt really like, you know, it made the whole thing be, you know, what it could be.
I think during the hazing and a lot of moments in this film, it's inevitable to think about movies like Lord of the Flies. But I thought about something else, and it's been turned into a movie, and that is the Stanford Prison Experiment, where people who are cast in roles start behaving in those roles. That was the prison experiment. On the film itself, when you have pledges and fraternity brothers who are hazing those pledges, what did you see in behavior that you needed for performance, but that started to scare you in how they were treating these young men?
Yeah, so that was really, I should have watched that movie before I made this movie, but I actually just watched it a couple months ago, and I really liked it. And when I was watching it, I thought exactly this. I thought on the set, what was so disturbing, I think mainly to the brothers who were doing the hazing, was how quickly they became entirely invested and started, you know, having some kind of perverse enjoyment while they were doing it. I mean, I think at one point we did a 14-minute take when they had the bags over their head and they were getting pushed down. And then when it got down into the thing, we'd been going for, and they just spontaneously picked up some of the props and started doing all that stuff, and it just turned into like the chimpanzee cage at the museum. I mean, it just started going nuts, you know, and so it felt like a social experiment. And I remember I called cut on that because I could tell it was like crossing the line. And a couple of the guys came to me after, both in the basement and out in the thing, were like, that was really disturbing, because I just felt like, and so for the, basically it's evidence of the fact that we are so easily programmed that within a matter of minutes, with the right parameters, we can be turned into monsters. And I think it's something that's very important to be aware of for all of us, So the Stanford prison experiment applies directly to my experience making it, and on all levels in the movie. I think they both share a lot of stuff.
This is a large part of the book, and it's certainly a large part of the movie, and that is the kind of homoerotic nature of fraternities. That there is a huge amount of incredibly horrible language about gay behavior and about being gay, and yet there is a very odd juxtaposition of the way in which these boys or young men touch and talk to each other. What do you want to say in this film about that seeming dilemma or paradox?
Well, I think a lot of homosexual hate speech comes out of insecurity. So people are probably scared that they have like a little bit of that in them. I mean, my belief is that sexuality is this sliding scale, and that as animals, we want to be affectionate, and that goes for young men too. And they don't know how to be affectionate, so that gets manifested in this kind of bizarre and sometimes brutal behavior. So it's like it's affection masked in these violent things that are masculine. So what allows them to demonstrate their affection is doing it brutally. As a secondary issue, I think men at that age are so horny that it's just like anything gets them off a little bit. I mean, in whether it's in warfare when young men are in the army, and also in prison, obviously. I mean, there's a lot of homosexual relationships with people who may not have, just the ratio goes way up. So I think that's also part of it. They're all isolated in that space. But I think it's a really funny paradox. I can't help thinking. And so I wanted to bring that out. Like, I encouraged them to say, fag a lot, because I wanted people to kind of like see that, and then yet feel how it was all kind of like touchy, rubby dude thing. Yeah.
Andrew Neel, thank you so much
Thanks
for coming.
so much.
Thank you
Yeah,
guys for
thanks
showing
for
up.
having me.